The evening rush at Le Blanc's restaurant was in full swing, with the clinking of fine china and the soft murmur of conversations filling the air. Among the bustling servers weaving between tables, one young woman stood out, not because she was trying to, but because of the quiet grace with which she carried herself. Maya had been working at this upscale restaurant for just over 8 months now. Every evening, she would straighten her crisp white uniform, adjust her name tag, and remind herself that each step through these doors was a step toward her bigger dream. At 25, she wasn't where she had imagined she'd be, but life had a way of throwing unexpected curves. The truth was, Maya's fingers were more familiar with piano keys than serving trays. Those same hands that now balanced plates of perfectly seared steaks and delicate fish had once danced across the keys at Juilliard, where she had graduated with top honors in piano performance. But dreams sometimes need to take a detour when reality comes knocking. Her little sister, Lily, had just started college, the first in their family to do so. Their parents had always stressed the importance of education, working multiple jobs to give their daughters opportunities they never had. Now, with both parents gone, Maya had stepped into their shoes, determined to keep Lily's dreams alive, even if it meant putting her own on hold. The restaurant's grand piano sat in the corner, catching the warm lighting from the crystal chandeliers. Sometimes, during quiet moments, Maya would glance at it while wiping down nearby tables. The instruments seemed to whisper to her, reminding her of countless hours spent practicing, of standing ovations at recitals, and of the pure joy of losing herself in music. Between serving tables, Maya would sneak peeks at her phone, checking emails for responses to the countless applications she'd sent to orchestras across the country. Each rejection stung a little less than the last, but her determination never wavered. She knew her time would come. She just had to stay patient and keep working. The regulars at Le Blanc adored her. She had a way of remembering not just their usual orders, but also the little details of their lives, asking about grandchildren's graduations or upcoming anniversaries. Her genuine warmth made even the stuffiest of guests crack a smile. To them, she was just an exceptional waitress, and that was fine by her. Maya didn't believe in wearing her achievements like badges. Her mother had taught her that true class was about how you treated others, not what titles you held. That particular evening had started like any other. Maya had arrived early to help polish the silverware, tucking away the morning's orchestra rejection email into the back of her mind. The restaurant was hosting several important parties that night, and she needed to be focused. Little did she know that this ordinary Thursday would turn into anything but ordinary. As she arranged fresh flowers on table 12, the restaurant's grand piano caught her eye again. The usual pianist was running late, something about traffic on the bridge. Maya overheard the manager worrying about it, but she kept quiet. She had learned early on that sometimes the best opportunities come when you least expect them, and tonight, fate had something interesting in store for everyone at Le Blanc's. The front doors of Le Blanc's swung open at exactly 7:30 p.m., bringing with them a gust of autumn air and the commanding presence of Richard Wellington II. At 60 years old, with silver-streaked hair and a tailored suit that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent, he carried himself like he owned not just the building, but the very air everyone breathed. Behind him trailed 5 other men in expensive suits, each clutching leather briefcases and wearing expressions that suggested they were more accustomed to giving orders than taking them. They were here to celebrate closing a major real estate deal, one that would probably make headlines in tomorrow's business section. Maya noticed them the moment they walked in. After months of working at Le Blanc, she had developed a sixth sense about difficult customers, and something in Wellington's demeanor set off all her internal alarms. Still, she straightened her back and put on her most professional smile as the manager led the group to her section. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Le Blanc." Maya greeted them warmly, distributing the leather-bound menus with practiced grace. Wellington barely glanced at her, speaking instead to his companions about property values and profit margins as if she were invisible. When she returned to take their drink orders, Wellington cut her off mid-sentence. "I'd assume you have Chateau Lafite Rothschild 1982. He asked, his tone suggesting he already expected disappointment. Maya nodded professionally. "Yes, sir. We have 3 bottles in our cellar." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a dismissive wave. Throughout the evening, Wellington found subtle ways to make his disdain clear. When Maya expertly described the evening special, a delicate Dover sole with brown butter sauce, he interrupted to ask if she actually knew what Dover sole was. His companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but said nothing. One of the men at the table, an older gentleman with kind eyes and a worn leather briefcase that stood out among the newer ones, seemed embarrassed by Wellington's behavior. He made a point to thank Maya each time she refilled his water glass, his sincere smile a small act of solidarity. As Maya moved between tables, she could hear fragments of their conversation. Wellington was boasting about buying up historic buildings in old neighborhoods and turning them into luxury condos. "Those people should thank me," he declared loudly. "I'm bringing class to those areas." The words made Maya think of her own neighborhood, where families who had lived there for generations were being pushed out by rising rents. The evening progressed, and Wellington's attitude grew more pronounced with each glass of the expensive wine. He began making comments just loud enough for Maya to hear, about how some people needed to learn their place, how standards at fine establishments weren't what they used to be. Each remark was carefully worded but crystal clear in its intent. The other guests in Maya's section noticed too. A couple celebrating their anniversary kept giving her sympathetic looks, and an elderly woman dining alone made a point to grab Maya's hand and squeeze it gently when she brought her tea. Small gestures of kindness that helped Maya maintain her professional composure. What Wellington couldn't know, was that Maya had dealt with people like him her entire life. Through music school, through competitions, through every step of her journey, there had always been someone ready to underestimate her, to try to put her in her place. And every time, she had let her talent and grace speak louder than their prejudice. Little did Wellington know, the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The grand piano in the corner would soon become more than just an elegant piece of furniture, and Maya's true talents would turn this uncomfortably tense dinner into something none of the guests would ever forget. The evening at Le Blanc had reached that perfect moment between dinner and dessert when the usual pianist would begin playing soft melodies. But tonight, the grand piano remained silent, its polished surface reflecting the warm restaurant lighting like a mirror. The regular pianist's absence was becoming more noticeable as the minutes ticked by. Wellington, now on his 3rd glass of expensive wine, was getting louder and more demanding. He'd already sent back a perfectly cooked steak, complained about the temperature of the room, and made several pointed comments about the service. Each time Maya approached his table, she could feel his eyes following her with growing contempt. "I thought this was supposed to be a first-class establishment," Wellington announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying across the dining room. "When I pay these prices, I expect the complete experience. Where's the entertainment we were promised?" The restaurant manager hurried over, apologizing profusely and explaining about the pianist's unexpected delay. Wellington waved him away with a dismissive hand gesture, his attention suddenly fixed on Maya as she cleared plates from a nearby table. "You," he called out, snapping his fingers as if calling a dog. "Come here." Maya placed the dishes she was holding carefully on her tray and walked over to his table, maintaining her professional composure. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Wellington's lips curled into what might have been a smile, but there was nothing warm about it. "Since we're being deprived of proper entertainment, perhaps you could fill in." He gestured toward the piano with an exaggerated flourish. "Surely you can manage to press a few keys. Or is that too much to ask?" The other diners had fallen quiet, the kind of uncomfortable silence that follows when someone witnesses something they know isn't right. The elderly woman with her teacup froze mid-sip. The anniversary couple exchanged worried glances. "I apologize, sir, but I'm here to serve your dinner," Maya replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "I'm sure the pianist will arrive shortly." "Oh, come now," Wellington pressed, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. "Surely you want to keep your job. I'm quite good friends with the owner, you know. One quick word from me." He left the threat hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The man with the kind eyes and worn briefcase spoke up. "Richard, that's enough. Let the young lady do her job." But Wellington wasn't finished. He stood up, drawing himself to his full height. "I insist. In fact, I'll make it worth your while." He pulled out his wallet and held up several $100 bills. "Consider it a generous tip for your entertainment." Maya felt every eye in the restaurant on her. She thought about Lily, about tuition payments and rent checks. She thought about their parents and everything they'd sacrificed. She thought about all those hours practicing at Juilliard, about music that had been her voice when words failed. The restaurant manager appeared at her side, looking nervous. "Maya, you don't have to." "It's all right," she said quietly, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. She looked Wellington directly in the eyes, something she hadn't done all evening. "I'll play." As she walked toward the piano, she could hear Wellington's satisfied chuckle behind her, could practically feel his smug smile. He thought he'd won, thought he'd successfully put her in her place. The other diners watched in tense silence as she approached the instrument, their discomfort almost palpable in the air. What nobody knew was that this moment, this attempt to humiliate her, was about to transform into something entirely unexpected. As Maya sat down at the piano bench and lifted the cover from the keys, she took a deep breath. Years of training, countless hours of practice, and a lifetime of proving people wrong had prepared her for exactly this moment. Time seemed to slow down as Maya sat at the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. The familiar smell of polished wood brought back a flood of memories. Her first recital at age 7, countless competitions, her graduation performance at Juilliard. But this moment felt different from all of those. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. The money Wellington was offering could cover next month's rent and help with Lily's textbooks. Their parents had always taught them to hold their heads high, to never let anyone make them feel small. But they had also taught them about survival, about picking their battles wisely. She could feel Wellington's smug gaze burning into her back. The anniversary couple had stopped eating entirely, their dessert forgotten. The elderly woman with her tea had set down her cup, her eyes filled with concern. The kitchen staff had paused their work, peering through the serving window with worried expressions. Maya thought about Lily, probably studying in her dorm room right now, completely unaware of her older sister's current situation. Lily, who had always looked up to her, who had sat in the front row of every one of her performances, beaming with pride. What would Lily tell her to do right now? She remembered their mother's words from years ago, after Maya had faced discrimination at her first major piano competition. "Baby," she had said, wiping away Maya's tears, "sometimes people will try to make you feel small because they're afraid of how big you can be. Don't let their fear become yours." The kind-eyed man at Wellington's table cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Richard, this really isn't necessary." But Wellington cut him off with a wave of his hand, still holding those $100 bills like a weapon. Maya's fingers brushed against the cool ivory keys. She could walk away right now. She could stand up, tell Wellington exactly what she thought of him, and quit on the spot. But something inside her knew that walking away wasn't the answer. Her parents hadn't raised her to run from bullies. They'd raised her to transform difficult moments into opportunities. The restaurant manager appeared at her side again, speaking in a low voice. "Maya, you don't have to do this. We can handle him." She gave him a small smile, appreciating his concern. "It's okay," she whispered back. "Really." She thought about all the young girls who might one day face similar situations. Girls like Lily, like she had once been, treating big dreams in a world that sometimes seemed determined to make them feel small. What would she want them to do in this moment? Maya closed her eyes briefly, remembering her last conversation with her father before he passed. He had been so proud of her Juilliard acceptance, had worked extra shifts to help pay for her education. Music isn't just about playing the right notes, he told her. It's about speaking truth when words aren't enough. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders, but instead of feeling heavy, it felt like wings preparing to spread. Wellington had meant this to be her moment of humiliation, but she could choose to make it something else entirely. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest acts of courage don't look like grand gestures. Sometimes they look like a young woman sitting down at a piano, refusing to let someone else define her worth. As she opened her eyes and positioned her hands over the keys, Maya made her decision. She wouldn't play for Wellington's amusement or for his money. She would play for her parents, who had sacrificed everything for their daughter's dreams. For Lily, who never stopped believing in her. For every person who had ever been made to feel small. But most of all, she would play for herself, because her talent wasn't something to be hidden or denied. It was a gift meant to be shared on her own terms. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the restaurant, floating through the air like drops of rain before a storm. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with the familiarity of greeting an old friend. The piece started softly, almost tentatively, building gradually like a whisper growing into a voice. Wellington's smirk began to fade as the music grew more complex. The low murmur of dining room conversation had completely stopped. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, pots and pans hanging forgotten in midair. The music spoke of deep emotion, of struggle and triumph, of pain and joy, of falling down and rising again. As the piece progressed, Maya lost herself in the music, just as she had done countless times before in concert halls and practice rooms. Her hands danced across the keys with precision and passion, each note ringing true and clear. The rich harmonies and intricate melodies filled every corner of the restaurant, transforming the space into something magical. The elderly woman with her tea closed her eyes, swaying gently to the music. The anniversary couple held hands across their table, dessert forgotten. A young busboy stood transfixed, his bin of dirty dishes temporarily abandoned. Even the typically stoic bartender had stopped polishing glasses, standing still with a claw frozen in his hand. The kind-eyed man at Wellington's table sat up straighter, his expression changing from surprise to genuine appreciation. As a particularly challenging passage flowed effortlessly from Maya's fingers, he leaned forward, clearly recognizing the technical mastery required. His worn briefcase, sitting beside his chair, had a small symphony orchestra logo that no one had noticed before. Wellington's face had transformed completely. The smug superiority had melted away, replaced by a mix of shock and embarrassment. The $100 bills lay forgotten on the table, his attempt at humiliation backfiring spectacularly. He reached for his wine glass with an unsteady hand, nearly knocking it over. As Maya approached the piece's crescendo, her entire body moved with the music. This wasn't just playing. This was storytelling through sound. Every note carried the weight of her journey, her struggles, her triumphs. The grand piano, which had sat quietly in the corner for so many evenings, now sang with all the power and beauty it was meant to express. Other restaurant guests had emerged from their private conversations, drawn into the shared experience of the moment. A child at a nearby table watched with wide-eyed wonder as Maya's hands flew across the keys. His mother wiped away tears, recognizing something profound in the performance. Through the wall of windows, passers-by on the street had begun to stop and listen, pressing their faces against the glass. The music spilled out onto the sidewalk, causing people to pause in their evening rush, holding onto this unexpected moment of beauty. Maya's heart soared as she played the final movements. Each note was both a declaration and a release, a statement of who she was and all she could be. The restaurant's usual elegant atmosphere had transformed into something extraordinary, something that would be remembered long after the evening ended. As she approached the final passages, Maya thought of her sister Lily again, imagining her proud smile. She thought of her parents and how they had always believed in her, even when others didn't. She thought of every person who had ever been underestimated, every dream that had been dismissed, every talent that had been doubted. The last notes hung in the air like stars, shimmering for a moment before fading into an absolute silence. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. It was as if the entire restaurant was suspended in time, holding onto the last echoes of something magical. Then, like a wave breaking on the shore, the applause began. It started with the elderly woman, then spread quickly through the entire restaurant. People stood from their tables, clapping with genuine emotion. The kitchen staff emerged, still wearing their aprons, adding their appreciation to the overwhelming response. Even some of the people watching through the windows were applauding. As the applause finally began to fade, Maya stood from the piano bench with quiet grace. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her head was held high. The elderly woman who had been sipping tea all evening was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, whispering, "Magnificent, simply magnificent," to anyone within earshot. Maya smoothed her apron and prepared to return to her duties, but the restaurant had transformed into a different world. Guests who had never looked up from their plates before were now smiling at her, trying to catch her eye. The kitchen staff peered out with newfound respect, and even the stern-faced manager was beaming with undisguised pride. Wellington sat frozen at his table, his face a complex mix of emotions. The $100 bills lay untouched, looking somehow smaller and less significant than before. His business associates were pointedly not looking at him, their discomfort with his earlier behavior now painfully obvious. One of them carefully slid the money back towards Wellington's plate, as if trying to erase what had happened. The kind-eyed man with the worn briefcase stood up, excusing himself from Wellington's table. As Maya passed by with a water pitcher, he gently cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm with genuine respect. "I couldn't help but notice. That was Rachmaninoff's second, wasn't it? The control you showed in the third movement was remarkable." Maya paused, surprised by his knowledge of the piece. "Yes, sir. It's one of my favorites." "I'm Robert Chen," he said, reaching for his briefcase. "I serve on the board of the city's symphony orchestra." He pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. "We're actually looking for a pianist for our upcoming season. Would you be interested in auditioning?" The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. At a nearby table, the young child who had watched her play tugged on his mother's sleeve, whispering loudly, "Mom, is she going to be famous?" Wellington pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. "If you'll excuse me," he muttered, standing up so quickly he almost knocked over his wine glass. His face had turned an interesting shade of red. As he reached for his wallet, his hands were shaking slightly. The other diners watched this scene unfold with barely concealed satisfaction. The anniversary couple exchanged knowing smiles. The elderly woman raised her teacup in Maya's direction, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both congratulations and victory. Maya accepted Mr. Chen's card with steady hands, tucking it carefully into her apron pocket. "Thank you, sir. I would be honored to audition." Her voice was calm, professional, but her heart was racing with possibilities. As Wellington hurriedly gathered his things, nearly forgetting his expensive coat on the back of his chair, one of his associates spoke up. "Richard," he said firmly, "I believe you owe this young lady an apology." The restaurant grew quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, expectant, justice demanding. Wellington stood there, briefcase in hand, his carefully constructed world of assumptions and prejudices crumbling around him. For perhaps the first time in his life, he looked genuinely unsure of himself. I apologize," he finally managed, the words coming out stiff and unpracticed. He couldn't quite meet Maya's eyes. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked quickly toward the exit, leaving his untouched $100 bills on the table. The remaining business associates looked embarrassed but relieved. One of them pulled out his wallet and left a very generous tip. Another wrote something on a napkin. Looking closer, Maya could see it was a personal check with an amount that made her eyes widen. But it wasn't the money that brought tears to her eyes. It was the note written beneath the amount. For your sister's education. Music runs in the family. Let's make sure it stays that way. The evening was winding down, but the atmosphere in the restaurant remained charged with something special. Every table seemed to be sharing the same story, retelling the moment when music had transformed an attempt at humiliation into a triumph of talent and dignity. The grand piano, no longer just an elegant prop in the corner, seemed to stand a little prouder, as if knowing it had played its part in something important. 3 months later, the same grand piano at Le Blanc's restaurant had a small framed newspaper article propped on it. The headline read, "Former Waitress becomes City Symphony's newest star." Regular customers would often point to it, proudly telling newcomers, "We were here that night. We saw where it all began." Maya still came by the restaurant sometimes, but now she wore elegant concert dresses instead of an apron. Tonight was special. She had invited the entire staff to her first solo performance with the symphony. The kitchen workers, servers, and even the stern manager had traded their uniforms for their finest clothes, filling up 2 rows in the concert hall. The elderly woman who had witnessed that fateful night was there too, clutching her program with excitement. The anniversary couple had brought their whole family. The young boy who had watched her play sat near the front, taking piano lessons himself now, inspired by what he had seen. Mr. Chen, the kind-eyed symphony board member, had become one of Maya's biggest supporters. During rehearsals, he often told other board members the story of discovering their new pianist in a restaurant. Sometimes, he would say, the greatest talents are found in the most unexpected places. The restaurant owner had turned that evening into a legacy. He created a music scholarship program for young artists working their way through school. The grand piano was now played every night, often by students who needed performance experience. The tip money was split between the performers and their education funds. Word about what happened that night had spread through the city's business community. Wellington's reputation had taken an interesting turn. Some said he had changed after that evening, that he'd started funding arts programs in public schools and quietly donating to music education initiatives. Others said he avoided Le Blanc's entirely now, taking his business dinners elsewhere. But the story of his attempt to humiliate a waitress had become a powerful lesson about judgment and hidden talents. Lily had graduated college early, inspired by her sister's persistence. She sat in the front row at every one of Maya's performances, just like when they were kids. The sisters had started a weekend music program in their old neighborhood, teaching young children that their dreams were worth pursuing, no matter what obstacles they faced. The story had taken on a life of its own, spreading through the city like a favorite melody. It popped up in conversations at coffee shops, in church gatherings, at school assemblies. Each telling was slightly different, but the heart remained the same. A story about dignity, talent, and the courage to rise above prejudice. 1 year to the day after that fateful night, Maya gave a special performance at Le Blanc. The restaurant was packed, with people standing in the doorway and peering through windows. As she sat down at the same piano where it all began, she noticed a fresh-faced waitress serving tables, her name tag slightly crooked, just like Maya's used to be. Before starting to play, Maya spoke to the crowd. "Sometimes," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed restaurant, "life gives you a choice. You can let others define your worth, or you can show them who you really are. Music was my way of speaking truth. Everyone has their own gift, their own voice. The trick is not to let anyone silence it." As her fingers touched the keys, beginning the same Rachmaninoff piece that had changed her life, Maya caught the eye of the young waitress. They shared a smile, a moment of understanding passing between them. The young woman stood a little straighter, her shoulders back, head high. The newspaper article didn't tell the whole story. It couldn't capture the tears in the kitchen staff's eyes when Maya gave them their concert tickets, or the way the elderly woman hugged her after every performance. It couldn't describe how the anniversary couple named their first grandchild after her, or how the young boy's mother wrote to thank her for inspiring her son. But that was okay. The real story lived in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it, in the changed lives and opened minds, in the music that continued to play every night at La Blanc, and in the dreams of every person who heard it and thought, maybe I too can show the world who I really am.